Samuel Hayes thought the war had shown him the worst people could do, but nothing readied him for what he found tied to his fence on that freezing Wyoming morning. Rope burns ringed the girl's wrists, telling a story he didn't want to admit. A 16-year-old, limp and near frozen, dumped like a broken calf at his boundary line. Her dress was ripped, lips split with thirst, and frost sparkled in her dark hair. Samuel knelt beside her, his rough hands shaking as he sawed through the rope. 20 years he'd lived alone out here. And now this. The girl stirred when the cords fell, her eyes snapping open with the wild look of a trapped creature. She crabbed backward and whispered, "Don't touch me." Samuel had already noticed the bruises on her arms, the way she guarded her left side. Somebody had hurt this child, then left her to die. His jaw set as old memories he tried to bury pushed up through the cold. "Easy," he said, staying back. "I'm not here to harm you." She searched his face for lies. Samuel was a big man, made bigger by 2 decades of ranch work, but something in his gray eyes must have settled her. She didn't run. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma," she breathed, like she was admitting a secret. Samuel glanced at the rope in his palm, then at the wagon tracks that cut away from his fence. Someone had hauled her out under cover of night and abandoned her to the wolves, the cold, or worse. Who did this? Her face went blank. Not confused, carefully empty, like someone who remembered too much. "My father," she whispered. The words hit Samuel in the gut. He'd spent 20 years outrunning the ghost of his own father, and now those same eyes stared back at him in a girl's face. He stood slow, mind racing. He could haul her to town and hand her over. That would be the safe, simple choice. But Sheriff Morrison took the company line and didn't pry when families said it was private business. Emma could end up right back where she started, or somewhere worse. "Can you stand?" She nodded and pushed up, moving like somebody expecting to be struck. Samuel's choice settled hard and cold inside him. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you in the warm." As they walked toward his cabin, a smear of dust on the horizon caught his eye. Riders fast. And he knew trouble when he saw it. The dust was still a long way off, but Samuel read the prairie like other men read print. 3 horses, moving like men, with orders. 20 minutes, maybe less. Inside, Emma sat stiff at the kitchen table, eyes flicking to the door every few breaths. Samuel poured water into a tin cup and set it down. "Slow," he said. She drank, hands shaking so bad the rim clicked against her teeth. He knew that kind of fear. He'd seen it in his own mirror the first 10 years after he ran. "Those riders," he said softly. "They coming for you?" Emma froze mid-sip. The look on her face answered. "He's coming back," she whispered. Samuel watched the dust, then looked at her. "Your father. He said I was payment on his debts," she said so quiet he barely heard. "Then he changed his mind. Said I wasn't worth enough. Said anyone who took me would be shamed." The words hit Samuel like thrown rocks. He heard his own father's whiskey-thick voice saying children were burdens smart men learn to shed. "So he tied you to my fence," Samuel said. Emma nodded. Said the wolves would fix his mistake. Something cold settled in Samuel's chest. Not fear, the weight of a choice that shifts a man's whole life. He'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this. Head down, trouble left alone. But looking at Emma, seeing the boy he'd been in her scared eyes, he knew he was done running. "Well," he said, lifting the rifle over his hearth, "your father miscounted." Emma shot to her feet, so fast the chair clattered. "You don't understand. He's not alone. He owes the wrong men, and they're riding with him." Samuel didn't look away from the window. How wrong? The kind that burns barns and doesn't ask questions. The dust swelled closer. He could make out faces. 3 men were riding hard, and one of them dragged something behind on a rope. A dead steer, torn and dust-caked. Samuel's stomach dropped. A message. He didn't need Emma to say it, but she did anyway. They want you to know what happens to people who interfere. Samuel crossed to his gun cabinet and drew his Winchester. 20 quiet years, and now the quiet was ending because he couldn't leave a child to die. As he worked the lever and felt the smooth weight of the rounds, something unexpected ran through him. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt like himself. "Emma," he said evenly, "you know how to shoot?" She shook her head. "Then you're about to learn." The 3 riders halted just outside certain rifle reach, close enough for Samuel to see their eyes, far enough to make his first shot hard. Not fools. Veterans. The center man was thick through the middle, hair graying, clothes that had visited too many saloons. Emma's father, no doubt. The 2 flanking him were younger, cleaned hard of softness, the kind of men who let money choose their targets. "Hayes," the older one bellowed, "I know you got my girl." Samuel stepped onto the porch with the Winchester easy in his hands. At the back window, Emma crouched with his old Colt, less shaky now that she had something solid to hold. "She isn't yours," Samuel called. "You threw that away when you left her to die." The man's laugh was mean. "That little is mine until I say otherwise. Hand her over and we'll call it square." Samuel felt his finger tighten, but he kept his voice calm. These weren't drifters. They stood like men backed by something big. "Who signs your pay?" One of the younger ones answered. "Marcus Devlin sends his regards." Samuel's blood went cold. Every rancher for 100 miles knew that name. Devlin held half this territory with fear and the other half with bullets. If Emma's father owed Devlin, this wasn't a simple family fight. "Mr. Devlin wants his property back," the gunman went on. "The girl's collateral. Daddy there tried to dump the goods instead of paying." Emma's father shifted in the saddle. "She ain't worth his price. Damaged." "Mr. Devlin will decide that," the gunman said, flat. "But he's in a generous mood. Give us the girl, and Hayes keeps his spread. Might even keep breathing." Samuel's glance slid to the window where Emma watched. 16 years old, and these men were weighing her like a cow. Collateral. Property. Damaged. Words he knew too well. "And if I refuse?" The lead gunman smiled without warmth. "Then we take her anyway, and you become one more sad story about folks who crossed Mr. Devlin." Samuel looked at the slaughtered steer they'd hauled to his fence. The message was plain. Devlin had men, money, and a legend that kept folks small. But they were talking first. That meant Devlin wanted quiet, at least for now. "I need time to think," Samuel called. "You got 1 hour," the gunman said. "Then we don't knock." As the 3 pulled back to wait, Emma eased close behind Samuel. "There's more," she whispered. "Something I didn't say about Devlin." He shut the door and the wind with it. Whatever she had to tell him wasn't for outside ears. "He's not just collecting a debt," she said. "He's my real father." The room seemed to tilt. Samuel sank into a chair, trying to catch up. "The man outside, the one who tied me up, that's my stepfather, Thomas Garrett. He married Mama when I was little, after," her voice cracked, "after Devlin threw us out." The pieces locked together into a picture Samuel hated. "He left you and your mother," Samuel said. Emma nodded. "When I turned 16 last month, he decided he wanted me back. Not like a daughter." Her hands balled to fists. "Thomas owed Devlin from cards. Devlin said he'd wipe it clean if he got me." Samuel's jaw set. He had met men like Devlin in the war, powerful men who took what they wanted and called it deals. "Thomas got scared," Emma whispered. "Said if Devlin found out what kind of man he really was, what he'd been doing to me, Devlin would kill him for ruining his property." The cabin went very still. Samuel understood now why she flinched at noise, why her eyes never rested. Thomas Garrett wasn't just a coward. He was a monster. "So he planned to let you die," Samuel said. Emma nodded. "Make it look like I ran and the wolves got me. Then he could tell Devlin I was dead when the debt came due." Samuel stepped to the window again. The 3 waited on their horses. This wasn't only keeping Emma from her stepfather. It was keeping her from a man who'd thrown her away once and now claimed her like a brand. "There's more," Emma said, quieter. "Devlin doesn't know Thomas has been hurting me. If he finds out, he'll kill Thomas. But he'll still take me." Samuel met her eyes. "And you'd rather die than go with either." She didn't answer, but the look was enough. Samuel thought about his own father, the beatings, the hunger, the knot of fear that never untied. He ran at 17 and built a life where nobody could touch him. Now he stood at the edge of the thing he swore he'd never do, step back into someone else's fight. "Emma," he said, voice steady, "there's something you should know." "Why do I understand?" She watched him, waiting. "My father sold me when I was 15. Said I covered a gambling loss. I spent 2 years as another man's slave before I ran." Her eyes widened. She'd been searching for someone who understood. She'd found him. "The scars on my back," he said, "they're from that man's whip. I've lived alone since because I swore nobody would hold a chain on me again." Outside, one of the riders shouted, "Time's near, Hayes." Samuel looked at Emma and saw his own past looking back. He'd run from men like Devlin and Garrett and the one who owned him. Emma couldn't run. She was 16, alone, and had nowhere to land. "What are you thinking?" she whispered. Samuel checked the Winchester one more time. "I'm thinking I'm done running." He stepped onto the porch as the hour died. The 3 riders were already closing, hooves thudding on hard ground. "Time's up," Thomas Garrett called. "Hand her over, and we ride out easy." "Can't do that," Samuel answered, letting the sound carry. The lead gunman nudged forward. "Bad choice." Before any iron cleared leather, more hooves rolled in from behind the cabin. Not 3 many. Samuel's blood cooled as he recognized the man at their head. Marcus Devlin rode like a man who owned what he saw, flanked by hands who'd earned their pay with blood. He was older than Samuel expected, 50, maybe, with silver hair and fine clothes that looked wrong against sage and sky. "Well now," Devlin said as his horse stepped around the torn steer, "what is this?" Thomas Garrett tried to steady his voice. "Mr. Devlin, I can explain, I'm sure," Devlin said lightly. "But first, Mr. Hayes." Those pale eyes cut to Samuel. "I hear you've got something of mine." Samuel kept the Winchester aimed at the first 3, but he felt Devlin's men spreading like a net. 9 against 1 was suicide. "Nothing here belongs to you," Samuel said. Devlin smiled with no heat. "I'm afraid you're wrong. Thomas owes me, and the collateral is hiding in your cabin." "She isn't collateral," Samuel said. "She's a person." "Emma," Devlin said, tasting the name. "Is that what she's calling herself now?" The way he said it made Samuel's skin crawl. This wasn't just debt. There was something personal in the claim, something jealous. "Let's set this right," Devlin went on. "Thomas, you snake. You thought you could let my daughter die, and I wouldn't notice." The word daughter cracked the air. He knew. He'd always known. Thomas's horse sidestepped. "She ain't worth the trouble. I was doing you a favor." Devlin's gun was in his hand before Samuel saw it move. The shot slammed Thomas from a saddle. "No one asked you to think," Devlin said, bored. Samuel's mind raced. Devlin had just shot the stepfather, but there was no mercy in it, only ownership. "Now," Devlin said, holstering the Colt, "let's speak like gentlemen. I want my daughter, Mr. Hayes, and I'm prepared to be generous." Glass shattered inside. Emma was running. Every man grabbed for his gun. Samuel spun, torn between guarding Emma's escape and facing 9 armed riders. "Find her," Devlin shouted. 3 men spurred around back. Samuel chose and dove off the porch. Bullets chewed the boards where he'd been. He rolled behind the water trough while lead sang past. He fired twice, dropping 1 rider and knocking another from a saddle. Odd still ugly. Enough. Devlin's shout cut the gunfire. "Alive, you fools." The shooting died to groans and stamping hooves. Samuel pressed against the trough, counting. 7 left with guns, Devlin included. 3 rounds in the tube. "Hayes," Devlin called, voice smooth again. "Pointless. She can't outrun horses, and there's nowhere to hide out here. Give up, and I let you live." Samuel risked a glance. 2 men had slid from their saddles and were creeping to flank him. Minutes, and he'd be in a crossfire. "What do you want with her?" he shouted. "She's mine," Devlin said, not loud but sure. "I made a mistake 16 years ago, letting her mother take her. I won't make it again." Hooves thundered back from behind a ridge. The men chasing Emma were returning. Either they had her, or they didn't. Boss, one called, breath burning. She's dug in the rocks behind the ridge. She's got a gun, and she can use it. Relief washed Samuel. Those rocks were where he taught himself to shoot years ago. Good cover. Clear angles. She could hold a while. Stubborn, Devlin muttered. Like her mother. Samuel saw his opening. While Devlin thought of the past, Samuel sprinted from the trough to the cabin, bullets snapping at his heels. He hit the corner and flattened against the logs, lungs burning. You're only delaying what's coming, Devlin called. I've got 20 more men an hour away. When they get here, this ends ugly. Samuel believed it. Devlin could lay a siege. Sooner or later, Emma would run dry. But Devlin didn't want to wait. Why not let her go? Samuel shouted. You threw her away once. Why care now? Silence stretched. When Devlin spoke again, the smoothness was gone. Because she's the last of my blood. Because 16 years back I let pride keep me from claiming my own. I won't do that twice. The words felt like something dark cracking open. This wasn't business. This was a man trying to own what he regretted losing. Emma's rifle cracked from the rocks. A rider cursed and hit the ground. 8 left. Samuel peeked and saw Devlin pull a bundle from his saddlebag that turned Samuel's blood to ice. Dynamite. Last chance, Devlin called. Call her down, or I blow those rocks to kindling, with her on them. He handled the sticks with a careful ease that said this wasn't his first blast. He wasn't bluffing. The fuse hissed to life. You got 1 minute to talk sense into her, Hayes, Devlin said. Then I end this. Samuel made the hardest choice of his life. He stepped out from the wall, hands high, rifle on the ground. Emma, he shouted. Come down. From the rocks, her voice rang strong. I'd rather die up here. No, Samuel called, voice cracking. Listen, there's another way. The fuse burned down, bright and steady. 30 seconds, maybe less. Samuel's mind flew through angles, routes, lies, truths. Anything to save the girl who had reminded him what it meant to stand for someone smaller. Then he saw it, the one thing Devlin hadn't thought about. Devlin. Samuel yelled. You throw that dynamite. You'll never hear the truth about what Thomas did to her. The fuse spat and ate itself shorter, but Devlin's eyes narrowed. What truth? Why do you think he wanted her gone so bad? Samuel shouted. What do you think he's been doing to your daughter the last 6 years? Understanding hit Devlin like a punch, and horror followed. His hand jerked toward the fuse, but too late. Time stretched thin. Samuel lunged for Devlin, tackling him as the man tried to heave the stick clear of the ridge. The dynamite flew from his grip and burst out in the open prairie. The blast thumped the earth and threw dirt and grit into the sky. When the dust slid back to ground, Samuel found himself staring down the black hole of Devlin's Colt. But Devlin wasn't looking at him. His eyes were on Thomas Garrett, crawling through the dust with blood down his arm. Thomas, Devlin said, voice flat as a grave. Come here. What came next was quick and cold. Thomas Garrett died knowing exactly why. Devlin's men watched, blank as fence posts. When it was done, Devlin turned his face to the ridge and did something nobody expected. He lifted his voice and let it carry like a prayer. Emma, I'm sorry. I'm not coming down, she shouted back. I know, he said. And I'm not asking. He mounted like an old man and gathered his reins, suddenly looking every one of his years. Hayes, he said quietly, she's not safe while I breathe. Men like me don't change. He paused, then reached into his coat and tossed a thick envelope to Samuel. Enough there to get her far. Start new. I won't come. Why? Samuel asked. Devlin stared at the ridge a last time. Because 16 years ago, I failed at being her father. Today you didn't. He wheeled his horse and rode off with his men, leaving the wind and the quiet and the weight of a gift no one would understand. Emma climbed down from the rocks an hour later, stiff and wary, rifle still in her hands. Samuel met her halfway and didn't try to touch her. They set a shovel to dirt and put Thomas Garrett in the ground without words or markers. When the last cloud thumped into place, the prairie swallowed the sound. Back in the cabin, Samuel counted the money, then stopped counting because the amount didn't change anything that mattered. It only made leaving possible. They packed what little they owned. A few clothes, his Colt, the Winchester, the small tin box with his papers, and Emma's one ribbon that wasn't torn. Samuel checked the sky. The light had turned toward evening. Colorado, he said. Far enough to start. Emma nodded, eyes on the road that didn't exist yet. They saddled in silence. Thunder, Samuel's old gelding, flicked an ear as if to ask a question, and then didn't. They rode out at sunset, the fence line and the low roof of the cabin behind them, the wide Wyoming grass ahead, and the day's secrets already falling back into the dark. No one spoke of Devlin's envelope, of the blast, of the words he'd thrown like a rope toward the ridge. They didn't need to. The air between Samuel and Emma had changed in a way you can't measure with miles. She rode a little straighter. He felt a little less alone. They camped that first night under a sky so full of stars it looked like a river. Samuel set a small fire and left it low. Heat crept into their hands and faces, and the rest of the world stayed cold. Emma stared into the coals a while, then said, "Does the fear stop?" Samuel didn't pretend. "It dulls," he said. "It never vanishes." She nodded like she already knew. After a while, she asked, "How did you live alone that long?" He poked the fire and watched sparks lift into the dark. "I told myself I was safer that way. Maybe I was. But safety isn't the same as living." She thought about that. "I don't want to be afraid of every door." "Then we open one at a time," he said. She lay back and watched the stars. "Thank you." He didn't say, "You're welcome." He said, "You're safe," and meant to keep saying it as many nights as it took. They crossed into Colorado 3 days later. The land changed in slow ways. More trees along the creeks, rock faces shouldering up out of the grass, a hint of mountains shouldering the horizon. They kept to back trails. Samuel traded 2 steers he'd driven off ahead of them for fresh flour and beans at a lonely way station where the owner minded his own business. Emma chose a blue kerchief from a peg by the door and paid for it with a coin from the envelope. Samuel didn't miss the way her hand trembled when she tied it. She caught him looking and lifted her chin in a small, quiet dare. He smiled and nodded once. "Blue's good," he said. "Blue's mine," she answered, and tucked the corner smoothly. They didn't talk much about what waited at the far end of their road. Towns were only names, and names didn't matter yet. What mattered was distance and days. But sometimes, when they rode through a stretch where the cottonwoods leaned over a creek, Emma would slow down and say, "Maybe a place like this." Samuel would picture a small house with a strong door and a window that opened to morning light and say, "Maybe." Once, when a freight wagon passed and the driver tipped his hat without questions, Emma watched the canvas top rock away and said, "Maybe I could sew." Samuel thought of quiet shops and measuring tapes and women who spoke soft and kind. "You'd be good at it," he said. Another time, when a ranch hand rode by with a book tied to his saddle horn, Samuel caught Emma watching it. "You read?" he asked. "Some," she said, and then a beat later, "I want to read more." He nodded and filed that away with the other small promises he was making to himself. Find a safe room. Find a decent job. Find a book. One evening, they stopped near a small town that didn't have a name on any map Samuel carried. The sign over the one-room church said simply, "Welcome." The preacher greeted them with clean hands and clear eyes and didn't ask anything past what he needed to know to be kind. He showed them a spot by the pump where they could water the horses and pointed to a long bench by the door. "Supper's at 6, he said. "You're welcome to sit." They ate stew that tasted like someone had stood over it and tried. Afterwards, the preacher's wife handed Emma a folded bundle. "A dress someone left behind," she said. "Looks near your size." Emma's fingers hovered over the cloth before she took it. "Thank you," she said, the words steady and careful, like she was testing how they felt in her mouth. Samuel watched that small exchange like a man watching rain after a long drought. They slept that night in the church's shed out of the wind. Before dawn, Samuel stepped outside and found the preacher sitting on the step, looking at the pale wash in the east. "Long road behind you," the preacher said without turning. "Longer ahead," Samuel answered. The preacher nodded. "You'll make it." Samuel didn't ask how he knew. He didn't need to. He went back to the shed and found Emma awake, the new dress folded neat beneath her saddle blanket. "We should go," she said. "We should," he agreed. They left a thank you on the bench in the form of firewood stacked neat and dry. No note. Not everything needs words. They reached a bigger town a week later, the kind with 2 streets that crossed and a store where the bell clanged when you walked in. Samuel found work driving a team for a freight yard whose foreman cared more about backs that showed up on time than pasts that hurt to tell. It was the sort of job where your hands got dirty and your mind could rest. Emma found a place at a seamstress's table, first sweeping, then cutting, then stitching hems as straight as fence wire. Her boss was a woman with a sharp eye and a voice that praised in short, true lines. Good stitch. Clean edge. Steady hand. Samuel watched Emma grow into those words the way a plant grows toward the sun it can finally feel. At night, he lit a lamp on a little table in a little room with a door that locked and read slowly out loud from a book the preacher had pressed into his hand as they left. Emma leaned her elbow and followed his finger with her eyes. Sometimes they stumbled and laughed, sometimes they didn't. Both with a point. They didn't speak of Devlin often. When they did, it was to remember a warning that helped keep them safe. "Men like me don't change," he'd said. Samuel believed him. That's why he changed the things he could. Their names on the boarding house ledger, the route he took to work, the way he checked a street before he walked it. He taught Emma the small rules that keep people hard to find. Don't make patterns, don't make noise. Make friends slowly and true. Emma learned fast. She also learned how to hold her head up without daring someone to knock it down. That took longer. It was worth the time. Months turned, and the ache of the old life faded from a sharp stab to a scar that only hurt in certain weather. On a market morning, when the street filled with wagons and the smell of bread, a flicker of fear still ran through Samuel that the wrong hat would show up at the corner. When that happened, he put a hand on the small of Emma's back and said, "We're good." And they were. On a quiet evening when the room felt safe and the door was locked and the lamp threw a circle of warmth on the table, Emma sometimes reached up and touched the spot on her neck where a rope had burned once. She didn't flinch anymore. She just reminded herself that the burn was old and the room was new. One day, a letter on thick paper arrived at the freight office addressed in a hand Samuel didn't know. The foreman passed it over without comment. Samuel didn't open it until the lamp was lit and the door was shut. Inside was a single sheet with a single sentence and a bank draft folded behind it. The sentence said, "Debt paid in full." The draft was more than the envelope had held. There was no signature, only a mark in the corner, a tiny press star. Samuel tucked the paper away and didn't show it to Emma until the next morning, when the sun made their little room look like a place made of gold and would instead of fear and plans. He set the letter on the table. "What is it?" Emma asked. "A door," he said, "one we don't have to open yet." She read the words and set the paper down very carefully. "Men like him don't change," she said. "Maybe not," Samuel answered. "But sometimes they pay what they can." She looked at him a long time. "We keep the door locked," she said. "We do," he agreed. A year later, they moved to a small house with a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a pot of something green that liked sun. Samuel still drove teams. Emma's hems turned to bodices and then to full gowns, and the woman who owned the shop started asking Emma to measure instead of sweep. On Sundays, they walked to the river and sat on a fallen log and didn't talk about the past unless one of them needed to. And then they did, slowly and true. Once, when the wind came hard out of the west and threw grit into their teeth, Emma said, "Sometimes the fear still shows up for no reason." Samuel nodded. "We don't need a reason to be brave," he said. She smiled a little, like she was adding that sentence to the small book she kept in her head, the one with lines that helped her stand. Now and then, Samuel took the Winchester down and cleaned it at the table, the way you tend a tool you hope not to use. He never set it where it could be seen from the street, but he set it where he could reach it in the dark. Emma didn't ask him to put it away. She understood that safety is not the same as pretending you don't need to be ready. She also understood that the sound of a door locking at night could be a lullaby instead of a cage. On a spring afternoon when the cottonwoods threw new green and the sky smelled like rain, Emma brought home a book she'd bought with her own money. She set it on the table and looked at Samuel like she was 12 different kinds of proud. "Read?" she asked. He washed his hands and sat. She read the first page out loud, only stumbling twice. He didn't help. She didn't need it. When she finished, he tapped the cover. "Blue's good," he said again, thinking of the kerchief, the sky, the way her voice had steadied over the words. She laughed. "Blue's mine," she said again, and went to stir the pot on the stove. They didn't write their story down. They didn't have to. It lived in the way Emma tied her hair, without rush, without fear. It showed in the way Samuel slept, deep, with one hand resting on the quilt instead of clamped around the past. It sounded like laughter sometimes, and sometimes it sounded quiet. If anyone asked how they came to be where they were, they said, "We headed east until the ground felt right," and left it there. The rest was theirs. Back in Wyoming, the wind still ran across the prairie and erased tracks like it always had. Fences fell. New ones rose. People said a lot of things about Marcus Devlin, none of them certain, all of them whispered. Some said he left the territory. Some said he didn't. Samuel didn't care which was true. He cared that every night when the lamp went out, he knew who slept behind the door he had promised to guard. He cared that every morning, when the light slid across the floor, Emma's first breath sounded like hope instead of dread. He cared that the man he used to be, the one who ran, had learned to stand, and that standing had saved them both. Sometimes, when the sky turned the same color as that first night they rode away, Samuel stood on the porch and looked west. He didn't see ghosts out there anymore. He saw a younger man and a girl with a rifle in the rocks, holding fast because there was nothing else to do. He tipped his hat to them the way you do to riders you pass on the trail, then turned back toward the warm room where blue cloth hung on a peg and a book lay open on a table, and the sound of a kettle meant home.